Welcome to Nordic Talks Japan. Nordic Talks Japan is a series of dialogues between our regions to inspire to act to the Sustainable Development Goals. My name is Niklas Karvonen from Nordic Innovation House Tokyo, and here just to deliver a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. Today's event is a hybrid event. We have audience here at our partner venue at University of Creativity, where we have beautiful views of the Mount Fuji today, and also many of you joining us online. Thank you very much for tuning in. Today's event will be held in English. We also have simultaneous interpretation to Japanese available. So if you're at the venue, please do grab a receiver. Or if you're joining us online, please select the right language from the Zoom toolbar. You can also use the same toolbar to send us questions during the Q&A. Or if you're at the venue, just please bravely raise your hand and we will bring the mic for you. Our program for today lasts for about 90 minutes. We will have opening and closing remarks from Nordic ambassadors to Japan, and in between a panel discussion to discuss the role of energy security in green transition. We hope that you enjoy the program that we have prepared for you today. And without any further ado, I would like to hand it over for the opening remarks. Ambassador from Denmark to Japan, Peter Taksøe-Jensen.
Thank you so much, Niklas. Martin, ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen in the house here and also online, a warm welcome to all of you and thank you for coming out. It's so cool for me to be back in this fantastic place. So also a great thank you to the University of Creativity to once again host us here. The Nordic Talks series of events is something where Nordic embassies in Tokyo teamed up and with the purpose of trying to inspire organizations as well as individuals. What we want to do is to create a room for reflection on how to instigate change and to facilitate dialogue across countries. We wish to base our conversations on Nordic values of trust, openness, inclusivity, innovation, with the overall aim to have action on the SDGs. Today's topic is energy security as a driver for the green transition. And of course, this topic is particularly relevant in the situation where Russia has created a new energy crisis for all of us with the unprovoked and unacceptable war in Ukraine in mind. And this war and the crisis is a reminder of the fact that green transition is no longer only a matter of climate change policies, it's also a crucial matter for international and national security. Back in the 70s, we experienced an oil crisis, and that sparked change. Countries moved out of oil from the Middle East and started to change. In Denmark, for instance, we started this journey towards renewable energy as our main source of energy in Denmark. And I hope that Russia war, even though it's so bad, can also lead to change, that it will lead to a situation where countries will accelerate their green transition because of this. We are already doing this in Europe. We are working to come out of the dependency of oil, gas, and coal from Russia. For instance, in the North Sea region, we see very, very ambitious goals to ramp up offshore wind, the same in the Baltic region. So this actually is now an accelerator of the green transition, what is happening. Of course, it will take some years and it will be difficult, but this is really what is happening. We need to get out of a situation where the fossil fuel producing countries, which happen to also be authoritarian, most of them are not and will no longer be able to use this energy tool or energy as a tool and a weapon against democracies. Today we have a distinguished panel. Many of them are my good friends. I'll start to introduce Tomas Kåberger, Executive Board Chairman of Renewable Energy Institute here in Tokyo. We have Stian Solit, Norwegian Honorary Consul in Kobe and Country Manager of DNV in Japan. My old friend and boss, Lars Lose, now Associate Partner in CIP. He used to be the Permanent Secretary in the Foreign Ministry. And then finally, also my good friend Yoshira Wada, now State Minister of Cabinet Office and member of the House of Representatives. And then with us today we have Vivian Tokai from The Economist, who's going to moderate this. So without further ado, I'll just give the floor to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador. I'm really honored to serve as your moderator with these prominent speakers today. And as Ambassador mentioned, the Russian invasion of Ukraine made a new energy crisis. And again, as Ambassador mentions, we experienced this energy crisis in 1970s. And Sweden, Norway, and Denmark and Japan all forced to diversify the energy portfolio from fossil fuel to nuclear and the renewables. So therefore, I'd like to begin with the hearing from each of you about your brief observation of the current status of your country's energy security. So why don't you start with Mr. Kåberger about the Sweden situation?
Yeah, thank you. Globally, the increased fossil fuel prices have almost simulated what we would see in economic terms if we had a global carbon tax. So from a climate change perspective, this is a gigantic force to reduce the use of fossil fuels and increase investments in renewables and other fossil-free alternatives. In Europe, we've seen dramatic increase in electricity prices, but that has not only been because of the higher fossil fuel prices. We've also been unfortunate in that we have seen less rain, especially in southern Europe, where there has been a lot of heat waves during the summer, but also in parts of Scandinavia, which has resulted in lower electricity production from hydropower. And then in France, they've had a series of unfortunate technical problems in their nuclear reactors. So that has decreased the electricity generation from nuclear also. So we actually in Europe increased the electricity generation from fossil fuels in the first 3 quarters this year. And we are now, I would say, suffering from very high electricity prices as consumers. But as producers of renewable electricity, this is just increasing the profitability of renewables and encouraging more investments in especially wind power, but also solar.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And how about the Norway situation?
Norway's situation, I say, is quite different than most other countries because Norway is one of the major energy exporters. So I would say Norway is in the so-called fortunate position that we are the 4th biggest gas exporter and 7th biggest oil exporter in the world today. And given the demand for energy, this is give Norway quite good condition to export energy as such. But we see also domestically in Norway, we are strongly affected by the energy crunch as such, on electricity especially. Norway, electricity has been more or less granted almost for free. When you live in Norway, you don't really, you used to not think very much about your electricity bill. We use electricity for heating. I think we are the 2nd per capita electricity consumer in the world. So that has been kind of taken for granted. And but when the electricity demand suddenly pops up and we have cables that exports also to Europe, that has had an impact on Norwegian prices and for Norwegian consumers as well. So on one side, we see that isolated for Norway, this is of course financially beneficial when it comes to export of energy. But we also see inside Norway that due to the electricity prices significant increase, that is creating, you can call it, if you can call something unrest in Norway, that will be it, because it affects people's pockets. But I also agree with Tomas, this is really increasing the drive to go for renewables. I see the government of Norway now, 2 days ago, they were launching kind of the frame conditions for hearing on big offshore or wind places in Norway. So I definitely see that as a driver, so in the same way as for Tomas.
But it's important to note also that the North Sea link from southern Norway to England, which everyone expected to be for export only, has now supported southern Norway by actually importing electricity from Britain, partly because Britain has been so good at building offshore wind.
Absolutely, and I think that's maybe an undercommunicated aspect in the Norwegian discussion as well. Yeah.
So, that power grid situation is quite important critical elements in the Nordic countries. So therefore, we're going to talk about the power grid things later.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Mr. Lars, how about your Denmark, the energy security situation?
First of all, thank you for having me here. It's great to be here amongst Nordic colleagues again. I used to be the Danish ambassador to the US, and we had a very good cooperation amongst the Nordics there as well. So it's great to be back here. Perhaps just a reflection on the drivers for renewables, first of all, because I very much agree. I mean, the security crisis or energy crisis has accelerated the drive towards a green transition. And we already had the climate crisis, which drove it in itself. There's a third component to this, which is that renewable energy today is cost competitive. The technology has developed to a point where it's actually cheaper to do renewables compared to coal, gas, and nuclear as well, and faster, by the way, as well. So it's a good business case as well. In that sense, it's very much a no-brainer. So in terms of Denmark is in a very different situation. We've been on the track towards renewables for many, many years. So today, the average production of electricity in Denmark is at 70% renewable today. And some days we produce more than 100% renewable of the electricity consumption in Denmark when the wind blows, for example. So windmills on and offshore were actually invented in Denmark back in the 80s and 90s. And it's today a big export thing for Denmark. Some of the largest companies in the world come from Denmark when they do this. But of course, we're also affected by the energy crisis because the price of electricity is not just a Danish affair, it's a Nordic, European affair. So all consumers are hurting these days, including in Denmark. So there's been taken unprecedented political decisions on where we want to go in renewables. Not just to 100% in Denmark, we want to go to 300% of the consumption in Denmark because we want to export it. It's good business. And you need to think about this as a regional matter. We need to link up not only the Nordics, we actually have a very good link. You talked about the power grid. We have this almost 24/7 real-time electricity trading system between the Nordic countries. If there's produced hydro in Norway, the price goes down. In Denmark, if you produce wind in Denmark, the price goes down in Norway and other European countries as well. But it needs to be larger than that. So we're actually looking at the North Sea as a new powerhouse in Europe. There was a big summit in May in Denmark, actually, where together with Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium, and Denmark, setting the goal of producing 150 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2050, connected by energy islands, thinking this in a completely new scale than we've seen before. It's a new energy system, basically. And that would bring us very, very far in alleviating some of the crisis we see today. We would actually be able to replace most of the gas that was previously imported from Russia through renewables in that sense. So that's a big political discussion in Denmark going forward as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that energy island concept is very interesting. We're going to talk about later about the energy island a bit more. And I just want to have one question. Do you think the Russian invasion, the new energy crisis, make renewable energy power generation cost competitive, or these crisis doesn't?
It's already cost competitive. And it's
even
been
before the energy crisis.
Even before, yeah. Of course, it depends a bit about on the market in which you start to build out. In Denmark, for example, we had an auction for an offshore wind farm of 1 gigawatts in 2021. There, the developer actually paid the Danish government 2.8 billion kroners to be allowed to build it. So it's actually, the state earns money through doing renewables. That's how cost effective it is, because it's good business in Denmark. Of course, if you go to a country where you haven't had offshore business or build out before, it's more expensive because there's no supply chain. You have to develop everything from the ground, but it's still very, very cost competitive. If you look at the New World Energy Outlook, which was published, I think it's 4 weeks ago, the prediction is that by 2030, it will be cost competitive in all countries of the world, including emerging markets and developing countries.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So, Mr. Wada, I think the Japanese people's notion, the general notion is renewable energy is not very much cost competitive.
As of now.
As of now. So, I'd like to know about your opinion or your brief observation of Japanese energy situation and energy security situation.
Yes. I really envy Nordic friends or European friends, because one way or the other, you are linked. Your grid is linked to other countries, and it is technically possible to support each other in the worst case scenario. Whereas Japan is totally isolated. Plus, Japan's dependency to overseas for energy generating resources is almost 100%. So we are not self-sufficient. So Russia invading Ukraine And this energy crisis happening, it was really a wake-up call for Japan to be, independent in the sense of, energy procurement. Now, renewable energy, we are about 20 years late from you guys, and we have just started the initiative of launching it in Japan. We really have to speed up the process. On the other hand, we have to face the reality of survival, to make sure that power is properly supplied to Japanese citizens. That is the really short-term issues. Whereas if we do not proceed the renewables faster, then our self-sufficiency cannot be confirmed. So we really have to speed up the GX, green transformation, renewables. That's our mission.
Thank you. So from your observations, I think to enhance or ensure the energy security, there are a couple of key elements. One is, as Awada Sensei mentions, energy self-efficiency rate. The other is in resource independency. The other one is renewable, obviously, and also the power grids. So for the Nordic countries, you guys have the independent resource, and also the renewable energy is very much highly adapted. And also the biggest strength of your country is a connected power grid with the neighboring countries and the regions. So I'd like to hear about what your opinion. What is most important elements for energy security in your country? How about Mr. Kåberger?
Well, the great opportunity that has evolved thanks to this industrial development in solar and wind is that we are now able to be truly self-sufficient. Even in the Scandinavian countries, apart from Norway, we are importing oil and gas, and we're also importing uranium for the remaining nuclear reactors. But the low-cost electricity available from solar and wind now makes it possible not only to produce all the electricity we need for conventional electricity use, we can also start using this electricity to substitute fossil fuels in the transport sector and industry. And the fact that renewable electricity is not only cheaper than electricity generation from fossil fuels, but since about 5-6 years, even cheaper than fossil fuels per unit energy, is going to be extremely important in the coming years. It's obscured by the fact that when we talk about electricity prices, we talk about dollars or yen or whatever per megawatt hour, and when we talk about oil price, we talk about dollars per barrel. And making that transformation in units, conversion of units, is not something everyone does every day. But looking at the development since around 2016, renewable electricity is even cheaper than oil. And that opens up for the electrification in the transport sector, where Norway has pioneered despite your oil resources. And for the electrification in industry, where the opportunities to substitute coal and produce steel without fossil fuels, for example, are very important examples.
In terms of technology, maybe just a small point, I very much agree with what you said, but we're also entering a new area with exciting new opportunities, because with the power to X, the electrolyzers, the ability to produce green hydrogen through green electricity opens up totally new possibilities, because you can only electrify about 50% of the total energy consumption of the way we live today. Cars, but there are airplanes, heavy transport, steel production. It's going to be, you cannot electrify that. There you need the green molecules, and we can do that through power to X. Japan was actually the first country in the world that had a strategy for green hydrogen. Nothing happened after the strategy, so many countries, in Europe, this is a big thing. For us, it's maybe the biggest thing when we look at new technology. The US, just with the Inflation Reduction Act, the US is probably going to be the most exciting market for green hydrogen going forward. That's going to revolutionize the ability to decarbonize the totality of society going forward, because you can do much more than just electrify things through green hydrogen. This also means that you have to think about this in energy systems. It's not just building an offshore wind farm or a solar PV farm. It's an energy system. Green electricity connected with through transmission to power to X, piping the hydrogen to where you need it, producing green ammonia for fuel or fertilizers. The possibilities are endless when you include that technology in the mix.
Yeah, as you mentioned, in thinking about energy policy, I think energy portfolio is the most important thing. Portfolio and the so-called best mix. Not, if it's 100 relying on the renewable, it's going to be a kind of dangerous in terms of energy security. And if it's heavily relying on the thermal power generation, it's also risky. So how do you think about the best mix and the balance of the energy security and renewables from the point of view of the best mix of energy portfolio?
But renewables is not only one source. It's solar, it's wind, it's hydropower, it's biomass. And geothermal can also be seen as renewable. So there is already an ensemble of different power generation technologies that are forever sustainable. And taken together, they can do a lot. And then, as you mentioned, the technology development now when it comes to low-cost batteries and electrolyzers that can be used to produce hydrogen and indirectly aviation fuels and shipping fuels makes it very possible to do it with all the different renewable energy technologies. They can together substitute all other old thermal, more expensive power generation technologies. But as you said, it's not just wind, it's not just solar, it's a combination of different technologies that are required.
Okay. Sure. How about Norway? Your country relies on 95% of the hydrogen power generation.
Actually, it's 90. I think now 10% from wind power. So I would say the Norwegian energy mix is the world's cleanest, which is also why it makes it a bit difficult to reach the goals of reducing carbon emission, because you're already starting with the complete green electricity network.
The electrification of transport is the way you're doing it.
So, but yeah, Norway is again a bit of an outlier here, because energy security for Norway, we have oil, we have gas, we have hydropower, we have also potential in offshore wind. But I would say for Norway, it means to diversify, because energy security for Europe is also security for Norway at the end of the day. At the end of the day, we're all living in the same region, in the same planet, in the same continent. And of course, we are depending that other countries also have energy security. So that's why it is important for Norway to diversify from export of oil and gas to more investments in offshore wind, especially where there is huge potential. There will also be an increased electricity demand in Norway. We are electrifying our transport sector quite dramatically. So the electricity demand will increase, but the hydropower potential is more or less maxed out. I don't think it's not much possibility to build out very much more of the hydropower due to political concerns that would have. So we need to go more for offshore wind. We mentioned power to X. There is going to be increased need for ammonia, for hydrogen. There is also the financial risk, as the situation is today with the energy situation in Norway. We are so much depending on gas export. We are benefiting from that now. But as mentioned here, there is really an acceleration on the green transition, meaning that there is a need for gas now, but there will be absolutely a decreased need for gas sooner than what we were thinking maybe 2 or 3 years ago. That means that we are getting a lot of income now, but what will be Norway's kind of export product in 2030, 2040, 2050? So that's why we also need to think about not energy security, or that's linked to the financial security for Norway as a country, that we can transition from a gas export to, for instance, hydrogen export, coupled with blue hydrogen, for instance, where using of CCS, etc., and utilizing existing infrastructure on the gas pipelines to the continent. So, yeah.
Thank you. How about Hana-sensei? Japan is totally different landscape from these countries.
Indeed, but our portfolio of renewable has to increase, and we have a lot of potentials for offshore windmill plus geothermal, also hydro. So we have a lot of room to increase the proportion. From the self-sufficiency point of view, we have no other choice but to go for renewables plus nuclear. So that's the only way. And again, what we need to look at carefully is that the self-sufficiency of supply chain basis. If we go for renewables, for example, offshore windmill, and we import components from China, then that is not really a secure way to generate power. So the entire supply chain has to be secure. In that sense, we have to have strong partnership of technology, supply chain, everything with the safe partners, reliable partners. That is going to be very important.
So who are the reliable partners for you?
Here, of course.
From all the countries.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Very much agree. I mean, the potential for offshore wind in Japan, when we look at, that's why we are here as a Copenhagen infrastructure partner. It's huge. I mean, the winds are exceptional. Of course, you'll have to get the floating offshore wind technology to work. So we have different demonstration projects. It's going to work. We have no doubt. We just won a lease last night for the first commercial offshore floating wind site in California, where it's very deep as well. So the potential is there. But if you want to have the supply chain in your own supply, you also have to be a first mover.
Yes.
And that's the experience we've had in Europe and in Denmark. It's the experience they have in the US. You need to move first if you want to have the supply chain. And Japan really has a chance of becoming this first mover in the region, because South Korea is very interested in floating, in offshore wind. It has to be floating as well. All around the region it's floating wind. So if you could get that supply chain up and running by having some ambitious targets on when you want to build out, the supply chain is going to move to Japan and ensure the self-sufficiency that you're looking for. I've no doubt about that.
Yes. The government has already committed to substantially increase renewables by 2030, and that is a commitment. So it is very important to really go ahead, make commitments. That's right. Yes.
I would agree that it's enjoyable to have a domestic supply chain, but it is not as important as it is regarding fossil fuels, because if you're dependent on importing fuels and you are cut off from your surrounding and cannot get fuels, then you don't have any energy, no heating, no electricity. But if you have imported solar panels and wind power plants and they are operating and you're cut off, they will continue to produce. So it's a clear distinction between the dependency on fuel imports on the one hand and equipment import on the other. But as we have seen in Sweden, where we are buying all these Danish wind power plants,
just continue to do that. With Norwegian gas.
we have done so, but at the same time, our industry has adapted. So there are Swedish companies that are sub-suppliers to Vestas and Siemens in Denmark, and the Swedish industry to actually do the installation has been developing in a very good way, creating a lot of job opportunities and well-paid jobs in the operations. So I don't think you should be overly concerned about local supply. It's a much less problem with importing equipment for renewables than it is to import oil, gas, and uranium.
Yeah, just a small comment. I really admire Japan's ambitions in offshore wind. If there's something to criticize, it, as you mentioned, it goes a bit slow. Seen from an outside observer, we are working in quite many countries with both advisory and classification of offshore wind. And to be frank, it is fairly complex landscape to navigate. It's a little bit of a slow process. And my concern for Japan's buildup of offshore wind is that this is happening so many. You have Taiwan, you mentioned Korea, the Nordics, US. And there's going to actually be a tightness on both the competence and the capacity and the infrastructure. So I think if Japan really wants to achieve the goals on reaching your renewable targets, you need to kind of do something to accelerate and make it a bit more simple to navigate. And I think you're also going to be dependent on outside competence, outside capacity. And in order to be attractive for that, there needs to be some simplifications in the landscape, I think. And I think also more control by the central government in allocating for that, because I think a bit of the complexity now is how to navigate the local and the regional and the central government's framework.
Yes. I cannot agree more, and I really wish that I work for the Ministry of Economy and Industry. But I think this Russian invasion to Ukraine has really put the switch on. Turned on the motivation to really go for the renewables. So I think the process will be faster, and we all know that that's essential. That's really critical for Japan's future.
I think just to mention, energy security is not only about kind of getting the energy from where it's produced, but especially in terms of natural disasters and other aspects as well, it's also very important. And for Japan, that's definitely also a critical point to consider.
Yes.
Yeah, great suggestions. But the Nordic countries already adopt a lot of renewables. It's nearly 100% in countries, or at least 50, more than 50%. But Japan is, you mentioned, just 18%. And the government has a quite ambitious goal, ambitious target, 36 to 38% by 2030. So how do you think what Japan is missing? Your country is already done the things, but Japan is still behind. How do you think, what we are missing to increase the renewable energies? What is the obstacle? What we are missing?
Well, that's something that Renewable Energy Institute here in Tokyo has tried to sort of find out. And we see a major problem in the way that the electricity market is not functioning in the way that it is in Europe. In Europe, you have independent transmission system operators, an open market where big and large producers of electricity are competing on fair conditions. There is a transparent, balanced market, all these things that ensures for new investors that they will have a fair access to the market. Here, the large power companies allow themselves to curtail renewables if it threatens their so-called baseload, and things like that makes it less attractive for investors. We also note that the permission processes and planning processes are extremely tedious in Japan. They're not very simple elsewhere either, but they're more complicated here. And then when it comes to the actual carrying out of problems, the demands sometimes from authorities, but also from the electric power companies on how to connect and what standards to use and so on, is making it unnecessarily difficult and expensive. So we talked about Japanese homemade cost of renewable as one of the obstacles. So there's ample room for the legislator to make these things simpler, and then industrial learning will bring down cost, will experience. But that's up to industry.
But I would say also, in all fairness, it's also difficult in Europe.
Yeah.
I mean, when you look at the political ambitions that we have right now, also in Denmark, by the way, I mean, it will take a huge build out, and the processes we have in place are not suitable for that kind of ambition. So the permitting in Europe takes too long, way too long. Also in Denmark, the tender process is very, very complicated and takes too long. So you have to think about this in a completely different manner if you want to get to scale and get the amount of renewables into the mix that we're talking about. It's actually, Peter mentioned it at the beginning in his speech, this is equivalent to the transition we had in the 70s. And back in the 70s, actually Denmark didn't transition to renewables in the 70s. We transitioned to oil and gas, but we produced it ourselves. But we completely rebuilt the energy system in Denmark, pipelines for natural gas, transmission concessions to private companies who did the drilling and found the oil and gas in the North Sea. It's equivalent to that, the challenge that we have to now. We have to rebuild the piping system for green hydrogen. The build out of offshore wind is just not 400 megawatts there or 500 there, it's 10 gigawatts, preferably connected with an energy island, because that's the way you can collect that much wind power if you want to. You have to think power to X into this, and you have to get it to the consumers as well, the power grid, the micro power grid, so to speak. That's a massive undertaking. But what we are advocating for in Europe just is to, I mean, if governments could concentrate on doing the distribution to consumers, the power grids there, let private developers do the big offshore build out at scale, the power to X, because it's good business as we don't need subsidies anymore. It's depending on the market, of course, but it's really, really good business as it is right now. Green ammonia and hydrogen will be a global commodity traded on a global market. It's not going to be a national product, so to speak. So this is going to change completely. And the paradox is that the capital is there. I mean, we're a fund manager. We have abundance of capital for green projects. The technology is there, it's cost competitive, as we said before, and the political ambitions are there. What we lack is a connecting bit between the two of them. It's permitting, it's tender processes, it's thinking the grid, and it's just about getting started and not thinking we need to fix everything in one go. We just need to get started to get there.
Yeah, I would like to hear more about your country's new project, like energy islands.
Yeah.
Would you please to explain more about the energy islands? I think it's a kind of magical solutions for the renewable energy and energy security or the region stability.
It's more a concept than a technology, actually, because we have the technologies in place. The whole idea about energy islands is to harvest offshore wind at a very, very large scale. So it's already been decided in Denmark. The tender will go out at the beginning of next year, and we'll probably have it done. There are other competitors, not just the CIP, but the island is supposed to be done by 31, 32-ish. And there we're talking about 10 gigawatts of wind connected. The whole point about an energy island is that you can move far out to sea, build an island. We can do that in the North Sea because waters are very shallow, where the wind is excellent. It's the best place in the world to do offshore wind. You can connect almost a couple of places where it's better, but it's really, really good because you combine it with shallow waters. You can connect all the wind farms to the island, and you can do one transmission cable to shore for the electricity. And then we want to build Power-to-X on the island to produce green hydrogen, which can be distributed through piping, which is much, much cheaper than transmission of electricity. That's the whole idea about energy islands. Actually, we spent the day yesterday meeting with the Japanese authorities, arguing that they should think about something like this in Japan as well, outside of Tokyo. Here you don't need to build you cannot build an artificial island because it's too deep, but there are plenty of islands where you can do this, build floating offshore at a very, very large scale, connect it to an island, produce green hydrogen, ensure power production for the Tokyo region as well. It's a huge opportunity to go there. But it's a completely different way of thinking because it's not just offshore wind, it's an energy system. You're building an entirely new energy system at scale. And the scale is enormous if you do it in that way.
So is this system connecting to the other Nordic countries?
Yeah, so the whole plan about the North Sea is that we are going to build probably 2 energy islands in Denmark within the economic zone of Denmark. Again, it's good business and you want to ensure that the piping go through Danish territorial waters to Norway, so they can pay back a bit of the money they earned on us over the last many, many years. And then we're talking to the British authorities about building an energy island there. It's in planning in Germany as well, in the Netherlands and in Belgium. Belgium is probably going to be the first country to have an energy island in place. And the whole idea is to connect those energy islands. And that's a backbone of the powerhouse that we want to produce, that we want to have in the North Sea, which in itself will almost be able to have the ability to replace Russian gas. If we're talking those amounts. Sure. The big problem is, just to refer to that, is the bottlenecks, because all this offshore wind will have to be built somewhere between 29 and 32. That's where all countries in Europe want to build out their offshore wind, and the turbines are not there. The ships that are going to put them into place are not there yet, unless we create a new supply chain and create the demand ourselves.
Means more production capabilities, you mean? Okay. Yeah, so I think you have...
Yeah, maybe it's worth describing this in more detail because it's relevant for the Japanese industry, that when the cost came down for offshore wind in Northern Europe, it was when you had a sufficient scale of new projects so that these special ships, special cranes, special offshore wind power plant industries were able to operate on a continuous basis. So the investments in capital could be shared by many projects. And this is when you get the sort of gigawatt scale offshore wind that is possible. Then you can build the logistics, the infrastructure and everything and utilize it fully. So that's why offshore wind requires this long-term, large-scale schedule, not just small dots here and there, because then you never get down the cost.
It's long-term predictability, it's scale, and it's industrialization of the supply chain. That's what it's all about, bringing down cost.
Thank you very much for the good observation about the production side. So now I'm going to talk about more distribution side. As you mentioned, the Nordic countries or the several European countries are connected with in terms of electricity market as well as a power grid. And I'd like to hear about the Nord Pool, which is led by the Norway. 10 to 20 years ago. I would like to hear about the Nord Pool from you.
Yeah, I think you probably know better than me on the technicalities of this, but just to revisit a few reflections in the beginning about the common Nordic market, that's for sure a beneficial, but for the green transition and for the energy situation in Europe, it has what we see now, again, I just want to go back to the internal domestic politics in Norway. Actually, there's talks, or there are many that we should cut the cables to the continent, which from the outside of Norway, it probably looks like a very, very isolated issue. But this is actually one of the things that I think many countries are, which is a bit preventing things to happen, because there are a lot of domestic forces in many, many countries that are increasingly concerned about their own energy, kind of the price level, etc. And that becomes part of the discussion. At the end, those people also vote, which is the concept of democracy. So that is part of the...
But at the same time, the answer from the Director General of Statnett, the TSO in Norway, to the minister when he raised the idea was that should we then also stop imports?
Yeah.
Because Norway is also enjoying the imports and making southern Norway able to operate at all. So I don't think those short-term populistic arguments about reducing interconnectors are so much of a real threat when you just explain how valuable these interconnectors are. But to answer the question on Nord Pool, which was a fundamental part of the re-regulation of the electricity market in Scandinavia in the 1990s, we had a very clear idea that we wanted to ensure that the electricity generation capacity was utilized efficiently. We wanted to maximize collaboration between the different countries so that we all had available the lowest cost marginal electricity generation at each moment. And the important components was the complete ownership and bundling of the transmission system, the TSOs operating without any connections to the generators, they were totally neutral in relation to the generators, and then the establishment of the Norwegian or the Nordic spot market, which is Nord Pool. In addition to the spot market, with the day ahead allocation of production capacity, there is also other important features that are the future market, which serves for hedging, ensuring that investors in consumption can get long-term contracts with electricity prices, and also investors can get long-term prices. And that was initially done by Nord Pool, but then taken over by Nasdaq, because these kind of financial instruments have to operate under other legal structures that they were better at doing. But this collaboration of electricity generations in the market in Northern Europe has been extremely valuable for reducing cost. So it's a fantastic opportunity to reduce the total system cost, to have this kind of well-functioning market. It has been quite difficult for some of the producers that were inefficient, but I remember in the Energy Commission that launched this, when some of the directors of the large electric power companies thought this was a bad idea. It would just create a lot of fuss. But then we said that if you know that you are very efficient and smart, then you will benefit from an electricity market. If you know that you're inefficient and unable to compete, then you will lose money. So if you know that you're inefficient, you should be against. And then they were all in favor.
Thank you. So Wada-sensei, Japan has no such connected electricity market or no connected power grid with neighboring countries. How do Japan endure the energy security or energy supply?
Again, self-sufficiency is the only way. We are not blessed with good neighbors, unfortunately. So we really cannot think of having shared grid with, for example, China or Russia or North Korea. So that's out of discussion. Within Japan, what we can do with partner countries, that's the only way. That's the only way.
Thank you.
But can I just add that I think it's also a lot remaining in ensuring that the domestic market within Japan is working efficiently.
That is there.
And that is somehow hidden by the Japanese use of the words that we use in Europe regarding full liberalization of the market and so on. But in practice, there are a lot of obstacles and inefficiencies in the internal domestic allocation of resources within Japan. So that can also be worked on.
That is a task that we're carrying. Open yet secure market within Japan has to be realized. Yes.
What I would also like to comment on for Japan, which I think is something Japan does very good, is what you're doing when you're looking towards ammonia and hydrogen. That's been there. Seen from my point of the industry, there's lots of very, very good initiatives going on ammonia value chain. Spread the knowledge, increase the competence, put up partnerships and cooperation between different companies, between different governments, between the different states. So there is a lot of things happening there to kind of focus on that part of the value chain, which is going to be very important as well. So there is a lot of credit to what Japan is doing.
Thank you. How do you think so? I know there's a lot of subsidies for these ammonia or hydrogen power generations.
Yes.
How is the Japanese government the policy for the next step?
That's the long-term mission of Japanese government to make it globally competitive. But now I still feel that we have just started in this area. We have a long way to go. So government has to make that industry stronger with support, financial support, and that is going to take some time. Yes, so that is going to be the long-term project. We have just started.
But just to add to that, I think as a market, as an ambitious country that we have the same discussion in Denmark, that want to be a front runner when it comes to green hydrogen, for example. Time is running out because when you look at the US and the Inflation Reduction Act, the tax credits that they have put in place for green hydrogen and the whole value chain for the production of hydrogen is so good that right now it doesn't make sense to do any projects in Europe or North Africa or whatever, because you want to move to the US. And there's a big discussion in the EU these days. How can we create a supporting system so that we have our own industry, because we want the self-sufficiency and the energy independence as well in Europe, and we want technological frontrunners when it comes to green hydrogen and power to X as well. And that we need to make those decisions fast if we want to have a developing market in Europe competing with the US. And I think the same is true for Japan, because not so much hydrogen, but green ammonia will be a global commodity. It will be traded on a global market. It's not for domestic consumption. And then the price will be fixed by the global price, so you would have to compete with the big markets here. And if you want to do that, you have to hurry.
And it's not only the US. China is also doing a lot.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So all of you mentioned the politics. Politics matters. Politics, influence the energy policies. So how the politics should be to ensure the energy supply and energy security from now? Because now we have lots of geopolitical risks like Russia or North Korea, and some other parts may happen something in the future. So how does politics or how does politician lead these energy security discussions for the future to enhance each of the country's energy security?
I think they should focus on the nuts and bolts, actually making this work, because we have tons of political ambitions out there, tons of targets. We don't need any more targets. We need to make the systems work on the ground. So I spent a couple of days at the COP27 in Egypt, what was it, a month ago or 2 months ago, and when you looked at the multilateral negotiations, also due to the geopolitical turmoil, they're going nowhere. I mean, we shouldn't count on new political ambitious global targets for this. This has to be fixed by individual countries and private developers and private investors. This is where the dynamic is to be found. And in order to make that work, make that equation work, you need to enter into a very close cooperation with the private sector, first of all. And then you need to focus on the nuts and bolts, the tendering process, the permitting processes, the maritime seabed, the spatial planning. I know that's a big work going on in Japan on that as well. We need that as fast as possible, so that private developers and the investors knows where to go and where can we count on being able to do this, because then the industry will develop, because again, it's cost competitive. It's good business.
And couldn't it be rephrased saying that if you go back 10, 15 years, then the political ambitions were driving development? But since about 5 years, when the economic competitiveness is there, now industry is driving, but there are lots of legal, technical barriers that is slowing down the development. So from a policymaker point of view, 10 years ago, it was a matter of ambitions and push. Now it's a matter of removing barriers in a skillful way, because that will decide which countries will see this development going commercial and fast and profitable for the country and the companies, and which will end up with a slow development, creating cost and making them laggards, the old inefficient countries in the world. So you say bolts, I say remove barriers.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. I think that's the important thing for the government is to set a predictable framework, and also collaboration between different governments, learn from the best examples. For instance, how Denmark and Norway has built out the offshore, for instance. What kind of framework have they used there? Can something similar be applied in Japan, for instance? Learn from best examples, simplify things, make things predictable, make things without barriers, as you mentioned. I think that's going to be the politicians everywhere in the world if you're going to accelerate the green transition.
How about what does it say? State minister?
Energy is, I mean, I'm not in charge of the energy. Energy strategy is a pure political matter, I believe. So the government has to drive. That is for sure. In 70s, until 70s, Japan had strong industrial strategy, and the government was driving it. But after 80s, somehow that has been vanished. So I think we really need to revive this strong initiative by the government to reinforce the certain areas of industry. And for sure, renewables is the one that we need to go for it. So that's what government has to do. And we need to determine, we have to invest, we have to be strong in this area, or we will not be able to survive. And the government has to decide with which partners we go along with, how we collaborate, how to create win-win partnerships in this area. That's the drive we have to show, the government has to show.
So Japan is going to host the G7 summit meetings next year, and the biggest meeting is in Hiroshima. The Prime Minister Kishida's constituent, and your constituent Hokkaido host G7 energy summit meetings.
Yes.
So what is your message?
My message would be that I'm from Hokkaido, and my constituency is Hokkaido, and Hokkaido is hosting the environment meeting. So Japan will, how should I say, take a strong initiative. Plus, Hokkaido will be the leader of Japanese renewable industries. That's the message we need to issue. And there are pending projects of offshore windmill, especially in the west side of Hokkaido, that is taking way too long. So we really need to start up, speed up. And we need to show to the global market that Japan's renewable is coming up, and it is actually proceeding and becoming commercial. That's what we need to do.
Now we talked a lot about offshore, but I think Hokkaido is a very good example of a part of Japan where there is an enormous potential also to develop wind and solar onshore. And it may be even more important to do that also because it's also a part of Japan where you have the problem of the rural areas losing population and so on. So the opportunities of developing renewable energy projects on Hokkaido to keep the population, create labor opportunities in the rural areas is also something that is a missed opportunity. So don't just look at sea, also look onshore, particularly Hokkaido.
Did things happen in Nordic company in the past? Like renewable, boosting up the local economy?
In the Nordic countries, definitely so, especially wind power now in northern Sweden, where the establishment of these large wind power parks sometimes have some resistance initially, but then when they are built and people notice they're not making as much noise as some believe and so on, they're visible. But if you're also part of earning the money and the benefits, and you get these opportunities of fairly qualified technicians' jobs to do the maintenance and so on, it's a long-term sort of core of the local economy after a while, and that's very valuable.
Danish Ambassador Peterson told me about the Faroe Islands in Denmark, where the island used to be a very depopulated fisherman's village. It has converted into the strong base of the offshore wind production and supply. So that is the kind of project that we need to look at, especially in the rural area of Japan, where population is decreasing, and we really need to put brand new industry in that area, revitalize.
But there are many examples of that. So CIP is building the first large offshore commercial wind farm offshore in the US, off the coast of Massachusetts. And then the whole fishing industry has gone bust many years ago. The offshore wind industry is what is going to save the population up there and keep the population in place, because we started tons of programs of re-education exactly for the servicing of the windmills, especially for the building of the windmills. You know, the harbor construction is pretty big. There's a big infrastructure around these production, also onshore, I should say, especially if you get the blade factories and then some of the supply chain in place. So the whole question about local content is a big issue, and there's a huge potential. There's, I think, 25% of all Danish exports today is green technology. So again, comes back to the business. So there's a very big potential in there. And I would say, I agree with what you say on onshore wind and solar, if you have the space for it. Because this NIMBY effect is complicated. People don't want to look at it. So,
but it can turn the other way when you see the economic benefits.
Exactly.
Yeah, I've seen from a Norwegian perspective, this is also kind of part of Norway's transition plan. Like we are so dependent, like oil and the fossil fuel economies is kind of such big basis for the Norwegian economy overall. So it's kind of seeing how that will go for the next 20, 30 years. We need some plans to stay competitive, to have people in employment. And of course, there is a direct link from our offshore competence for oil and gas exploration to offshore wind. So that's kind of a big focus area from Norway as well, because especially within floating offshore wind, I think Norway considers to be quite in the front seat of both competence and research and development. So this is where we want to make kind of push into the future from a Norwegian perspective.
Sounds great. You know, the renewable energy, especially offshore wind, has a lot of potential for economically or the energy security or any sort of thing. So, you know, now we have 10 minutes left. I would like to have a final discussion and topic, you know. So we have lots of hints how to enhance the energy security, and why the Nordic countries enhance their energy securities. So I have currently one question, like, you know, now we have facing two risks. One is a geopolitical risk. We talk about the Russian invasion to Ukraine, but other risk is a cybersecurity thing, cybersecurity or security for power stations. A couple of days ago, the US power station in North Carolina got some attacks, like vandalized. You know, the cybersecurity risk and kind of these vandalism attack risks. How do you think about these cyber security risks in terms of your in terms of energy security environment? Does your country do any things on the cybersecurity measures?
Yeah, but it's definitely a relevant question, and I think the war in the Ukraine now has made very clear the vulnerability of the large-scale power plants and parts of the infrastructure, which have been under attack to create difficulties for the Ukrainian population. We also seen the rather exciting challenges for the nuclear power plants, where power cuts may result in core melts because of failure in cooling, just like Fukushima. At the same time, there was a little experience where a Russian grenade hit a solar power park in the Ukraine. And you can see these pictures with a big crater and solar panels have flown away. And then within 24 hours, they sort of removed the damaged solar panels, connected the rest, and production started again. And they said, well, I think the grenade cost more money than the damaged solar panels. And that's quite an important thing, that these things are more robust. Someone mentioned the natural disaster risks here. I mean, with solar panels on rooftop and batteries, you will be able to get the essential electricity even after large natural disaster, earthquakes, typhoons, and things that are something that can otherwise create quite a lot of suffering in countries like Japan. So these things should be used, these opportunities should be used. And that is then important to ensure that when you install solar panels, for example, you also have this, technically, you have this opportunity to operate them even if the grid fails.
Thank you. How about your opinion?
Definitely cybersecurity in all kind of societal functions is getting an increased focus, and especially when it comes to electricity grid, because now increasingly I use electricity for transportation as well, so you will basically not have storage of fossil fuels stored anymore in the future, and that means that you will get more and more depending on having a functional grid or functional electricity system, which again means that it's going to be increasingly a target for people with bad intention. Hence, cybersecurity needs to have an increased focus, and I'm quite confident that governments at least have a significant focus on that. Yes.
Thank you. How about you?
If you allow me to fly a bit higher, this is going back to my time in the foreign ministry. I mean, we are entering a new world era. We spent 30 years in the liberal world order where we've done everything we could to separate politics and economics to reap the full benefits of globalization. You know, international division of labor, supply chains all over, because it worked very well and the price was very low, which is one of the reasons why we kept on increasing our dependency on Russian gas, even though we had the invasion in Georgia in 2008 and the annexation of Crimea in 2014. So, but things are different now. So when we do energy and when we do renewables, it's the same thing with nuclear installations. I very much agree with what you said, Thomas. This is critical infrastructure, and you have to think about this as critical infrastructure. And this is broad. Cyber is definitely one of this, but it's broader than that. It's also a question about supply chain. You mentioned it before. We learned that during COVID. We don't want to be dependent on global supply chain if we're talking about critical infrastructure. You need to do a screening when you talk about investors who are actually investing in this critical infrastructure. You need to have your cyber attacks defenses in place. And we just saw off the coast of Bornholm, which is a small Danish island, that somebody, we can all speculate about who that, bumped the pipeline, what's called Nord Stream 1 pipeline, cutting off effectively all future gas from Europe. So we are vulnerable in that sense. In practical terms, we're working with the defense company and seeing how if we can install radars on offshore windmills to do the surveillance above water and below water as well. Drones are a big issue also for these installations now. But this is not different from any power plant, nuclear. And I would argue that nuclear power plants would be the most vulnerable installations that we have by far, not comparable to a couple of windmills where that are pretty far apart. So if you threw a grenade there, probably hit one or two of them, can be replaced, and then you'll start over again. So it's not a big issue. It's not a specific issue for renewables, I would say, but it's a specific issue for renewable infrastructure, energy infrastructure as such.
Thank you. So how about Wada-sensei? How do you enhance Japanese energy security under the current circumstances? There are too many risks here.
Cybersecurity is always a critical risk. And offender is always stronger than defender. So it is always very tough. Unlike the US, Japanese cybersecurity organization, we do not have the specific ministry to overlook the cybersecurity of the other ministries. So this organization will be improved in a short period of time. Plus, we'll be increasing the number of teams to support the cybersecurity. Whereas physical security, or for example, nuclear power plant, as of today, limited number of police with small machine gun, they're there protecting, which is obviously not enough. So defense force will be guarding nuclear power plant with anti-air systems that is going to be there. That's very important. We need to take care of the North Korean missiles that can fly into Japanese air any point in time. So that is going to take place very shortly too. When it comes to the supply chain, it is, I think, one of the most critical points when it comes to the cybersecurity and other securities too. Since 2020, Japanese government has start taking this strong initiative towards the economic and national security. We have government has started recovering or retake the production of core components, semiconductors, microcomputer, back to Japan by subsidizing 500 billion yen in 2020, and the amount has increased to 900 billion yen in 2021 and 2022. So this will continue happening, and that is going to not only enforce the Japanese security of Japanese infrastructure and supply chain, but to reinforce the Japanese industry as well.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. So now I'm going to open up the floor for the question. I'm going to take one or two questions.
My name is Tanja Jääskeläinen. I'm the ambassador of Finland, and I'm really, it's great pleasure to be part of the Nordic talks for the first time. And thank you for the host, University of Creativity, wonderful venue. And thank you for the great panel. It was really a pleasure to hear about your very impressive views about the green transition and energy security. But you haven't mentioned a word which I think is also very important. That's the saving energy side. And we in the Nordics, of course, due to our location, geographical location and natural conditions, we've been paying attention to this for decades. First, we've learned how to build build smartly, smart construction, insulation, triple windows, and things like that, which really make a difference to energy saving and energy consumption. Secondly, I think we have done a good job in awareness raising and in educating people that actually you can do quite a lot with little things, like switching off the lights and, you know, switching off the shower in the meantime, you wash your hair and so forth. But now in recent months, we've also been, we had to do some drastic changes also. I mean, really think about saving energy in forms of, you know, lowering the temperature of, you know, room temperature of public spaces, homes, private places as well, dimming the lighting, and you know, we are sauna people in Finland, and those many saunas are heated with electricity, and when people were really they had to think about how often they go to sauna or lower the temperature, and that is a big thing, a sacrifice for Finnish people. So I was wondering where you are in Japan, Mr. Wada, how do you see the energy saving discussion? And since I haven't really seen that a lot. I haven't seen many consequences of the energy crisis here as to the wonderful city lights and things like that, and also maybe a few words, if you may, on the smart construction. I think there are a lot of potential to improve that, since your natural conditions are not that different from the Nordics, especially when we talk about Hokkaido and your area, Mr. Wada. So maybe a word of that from you. And a second, just very briefly, just an observation that you have an asset in Japan, and that is the thermal. You are a very volcanic country. And I just wonder, I mean, why that has not been benefited so much so far. I mean, we don't have that in Finland, and I would love to heat my sauna with the geothermal. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ada-sensei, please.
Hey, thank you very much for your comments and question, Madam Ambassador. At the level of Japanese citizens, the awareness of saving energy is, I think, concrete, in my opinion. I have not really made comparison with other countries. For example, if you want to enjoy sauna in Japan, go to government office in summer because temperature is set at 28 degrees, which is really hot and humid. So that is there. I really have to thank people's patience. Also, in everyday life, we really do switch off lights at the point of need. So that kind of consensus is there at a citizen level. When it comes to the zero emission building and houses, as you mentioned, that has just started. Government will promote and subsidize those zero emission house and buildings. That initiative has already started. So I think that is going to help save energies. Yes, that is on the way. Yes, thank you so much.
I just want to say, I think there is a fundamental and important difference between energy efficiency, such as more well-insulated houses, better windows, LED light instead of the less efficient light alternatives on the one hand, which is always desirable. And then it's a sort of sacrifice, like the high temperature in the offices, which I'm not so enthusiastic about.
Me neither.
I think an advanced industrial country should be able to provide for its citizens, so you could use efficient technologies and have a good indoor climate and good energy services by being efficient, not by making sacrifice. So that's definitely my priority every day of the week.
Yes, I really agree. And I think the patience of Japanese people is spoiling the Japanese industry or government's action. That's, I shall agree. Yes.
Thank you.
I mean, energy efficiency is important when we talk about the energy crisis. We have this Danish company, Danfoss, who produces thermostats. They have this great motto, say the cheapest energy is the energy you don't use, which is completely true. Yeah, exactly. But the thing is, I mean, when you look at the World Energy Outlook, I mentioned a couple, I thought that was a very interesting report. I mean, the energy consumption of globally is going to triple when we approach 2030. I mean, when they start using air conditioning in sub-Saharan countries in Africa, it's going to blow the roof off, and you cannot prevent that. That's why the production part is so extremely important. And I very much agree with what Thomas said as well. We need to be able to provide as well.
But at the same time, efficient use is just as important. So it's a way of really applying a combination of good economic analysis and state-of-the-art technology.
Exactly.
I mean, I've been to government offices here in Japan, where you had inefficient light bulbs that produced a lot of heat, and then you did not bother to change to LED, and you didn't spend the money on the air conditioning, and you had this 28-degree semi-sauna atmosphere. I'm not sure it's the best environment for efficient civil servants to perform well.
So we are running out of time. So we just 1 minute left. So I'm going to take just one final question if you have. Go ahead. Oh, sorry. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Stefán Jóhannesson, Ambassador of Iceland. Thank you for very interesting discussions. I would like to ask about nuclear energy and direct my question to you, Wada-san, and you, Tomas. Japan is revisiting nuclear with a vengeance, if you will. And if I recall correctly, according to the government's energy plan, the intention is to have nuclear up to 20% of the energy mix in Japan by 2030. So I wanted to ask you and Tomas, how is it realistic? How competitive is nuclear energy in terms of prices? If you could elaborate a little bit on that. And if I also may pick up what Tanya said about geothermal, coming from Iceland, I have to touch upon that since to earn my wages. So there is a huge potential in terms of geothermal in Japan. Couldn't you do more in that respect? Thank you.
Thank you. May I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. Thank you for the question, Mr. Ambassador. Regarding the geothermal, I forgot to answer. 80% of the Japanese geothermal potential is concentrated in Hokkaido. So we really have to make good use of it in such a cold a place like Hokkaido. Japanese government has been trying to enhance geothermal, but we have not been successful because of the environment activists' oppositions. And at that time, we had other options of energy sources, so we were not too keen on geothermal. But now the situation is totally different. Self-sufficiency is critical. So we really need to look at geothermal, especially in Hokkaido. And I think that action will be taken soon. And when it comes to nuclear, we are very serious. And we think without nuclear, I don't think we'll be able to survive, especially in this coming couple of years. So whatever is ready to reactivate, the government will reactivate. This is a pure political decision. And Kishida-san has already made that decision. So that is going to take place. Price competitiveness, I really haven't compared with other countries, and I'm not the specialist in that area. So I hesitate to answer to that point. But still, if majority of the nuclear power plant are being activated, then the electricity price will come down for sure. So, and that is one of the attractive points of reactivating nuclear power plant, in addition to self-sufficiency.
Well, if you look at the international data on the cost of nuclear, if you look at just the operational cost of continue to operate existing nuclear reactors, we have the Lazard annual levelized cost of energy publication showing that in the US, the total cost of new solar and wind is now lower than the cost of continued operation in some nuclear reactors. In Sweden, we can look at the nuclear power plants, their annual production cost, because they publish that every year. And you can compare that to the cost of building new wind, and you see the same. The least efficient power plants are cost more than the total cost of new capacity with solar and wind. There are new nuclear projects built in the world, but there are also many old reactors closed. The maximum electricity production from nuclear was in 2006. Last year, nuclear contributed less than 10% of global electricity for the first time in 40 years. So from sort of economic competitiveness perspective, nuclear is not performing particularly well, and the new builds in Europe, in Finland and France and Britain have been economic, I think it's worth saying, disasters, because they cost many times, not just twice, but many times as much as building new wind or solar.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. So I'm going to conclude the panel discussion, and thank you very much for all of the panelists, and please give them a big applause. Thank you. Now I hand it over to the ambassador for the closing remarks.
Thank you very much. Hello, ambassadors. Yes, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, warm thanks to my colleague, Taksøe-Jensen from Denmark, for our wonderful panelists, Tomas Kåberger, Stian Solid, Lars Losa, and Yoshihata Wada, and to our efficient moderator, William Tokai. I must admit, you have inspired me in the true spirit of the Nordic talks. Even if you have come up with very many bright ideas and reflections, we might not have solved all our dilemmas or even reached a consistent solution to them. But thank you very much. But to see representatives from academia, from news media, domestic and international companies, governments, and diplomats here in the audience at the University of Creativity and online, it gives me faith that a green transition is not only desirable and possible, but that it will in fact take place, not only in the Nordic countries, but also in Japan. Many factors, not only the war in Ukraine, will influence the speed and scale of the green transition. The situation in the world today really makes it urgent for all to have a diversified energy mix to secure sustainable energy supply and consumption, in addition to the climatic imperatives we are facing. But one thing is certain and quite universal. To make the green transformation happen, we need strong partnerships between public and private actors. You have talked a lot, not only about the drive from private companies, but indeed also the necessity for government intervention and leadership. Another striking feature is that the situation today not only represents challenges and difficulties, but indeed also great opportunities within a rapidly changing global economy. So we need to help each other to identify and make most of these possibilities. Both Japan and the Nordic countries have set ambitious targets for the decarbonization of our economies and the increased use of renewable energy. The stakes couldn't be higher. We do this to achieve a more sustainable energy supply, to reach our political goals, and to save our planet. So, as we say in Norwegian, let's roll up our sleeves and get to work. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So, I think I'm gonna...
Thank you very much. Yes, I get the honor of inviting all of you who are here with us today to continue the discussions at a lunch. And those of you who followed us online, thank you very much for being with us. And we will close the streaming here. Thank you very much, and a warm big hand once again to all of our panelists.